Hi, everybody. Welcome back to NGI today. We are going to be talking about the coronavirus. There is a lot of fear going around about the coronavirus. We've been getting lots and lots of questions into the practice today. So I'm Dr. Chrissy. I've got Michelle, Laura, and Sam with me today. So we're just going to kind of go off the cuff and open up our discussion. So ladies, how's everybody feeling today?
I'm sick. Don't get corona. My
All right.
and I'm sticking to it, but you know.
Yeah. So, and Laura and Michelle, you guys doing all right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Feel good? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I'm sitting on my hands so I don't put them on my face.
yeah.
Yes.
So we're going to talk to you guys a lot about what to do. So about how to prevent getting the common cold, viruses. Not everybody knows this about me, but I did study virology way back when in college. We're not going to talk about how long ago that was.
Last year.
Right, it was totally last year, right? Yeah. Right, you guys are sweet. But we're going to talk about that because people are really stressed out about this. I mean, have you guys gotten calls from your parents, school? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, they're telling our kids that they may have to have school at home through a computer for a few weeks.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're going to do it for sure, but some of the schools around us have been practicing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I need to touch my face. Can you please touch it? Oh,
yeah, my face right now.
It's not to. It's so bad.
So I've got a mom's group, and so there's lots of comments about the coronavirus and how nervous people are and whether people are going to stay home from work and all of those kinds of things. So definitely a hot topic.
Yeah, in New York City, they're having people work remotely.
Yeah, already, right.
Some of the work, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so it's kind of a good thing that we all work from home. So for those of you guys who don't know, so NGI is an all-female practice, and we all work remotely, which is kind of a cool thing. So let's kind of get into this, guys. So, some of the things that we are, that help to prevent the spread of viral illness is washing your hands, right? So, let's talk about that. And we're kind of joking about not touching our faces because we've all already touched our faces several times, right? We're all gonna, touch you guys. So let's talk about proper hand washing. Okay, so how do we wash our hands? And it sounds like kind of a silly thing. Everybody washes their hands, hopefully a couple times a day. But how do you wash your hands? What are you supposed to do? Laura, you want to talk about that, or Sam?
So I know when I used to work for the Department of Health, and what our rule of thumb was that you wanted to wash your hands long enough to sing the birthday song at least twice. So, we'd see people standing at the sink singing to themselves, and it might look kind of weird, but it's all about, making sure you get that soap everywhere. We were talking earlier about, ladies, if you have long nails, making sure that you get under those nails because bacteria just accumulates under there. All kinds of dirt, all kinds of lovely bugs and things like that. And then another point too is just making sure that if you are concerned about the spread of these viruses, wiping down things that you or other people touch often, like doorknobs, light switches, your cell phone is nasty. So making sure that you wipe that down relatively often because you touch it constantly.
That's funny because I did that this morning with my phone at the gym. I got hand sanitizer. I put the sanitizer on my phone.
Yeah.
Thinking I'm just going to go and touch that. So I'm literally just
Well, and speaking of the gym too, I don't know how many of y'all are OCD like me, but if I'm using a machine, I wipe it down before I sit on it and I wipe it down afterwards because the gym is just a cesspool.
Yes. Yeah. I actually go and get the wipes or a Purell in my hands, which we'll talk about. Well, maybe I shouldn't say Purell. Sanitize. We're not endorsing anything here. But sanitize the handlebars or anything else first. And then, hold it, and then afterwards go and do that. So one of the things that is pretty interesting is we've been told, at least in the systems medicine world or functional medicine world, not to use hand sanitizer, right? Because it changes our hormones and all that kind of stuff, because it has antibiotic stuff in it. It's going to, the triclosan, it's going to change the way our bodies function. So, we're kind of caught in a catch-22 here. So, but there are some, only alcohol-based ones that, are available. And so this is something that can be really helpful. So step one, wash your hands, right? And again, ladies, under your fingernails. Guys, too, if you have longer fingernails, you have nails too. I don't care if you bite your nails. I don't care how short they are. Get under your fingernails, folks, okay?
If you bite your
and
nails.
Also, don't forget your thumbs. There was an article in the New York Post yesterday about most people miss their thumbs. That's where we carry most of our germs. So I'm double jointed, as you can see.
Yeah.
Right? About that.
Yeah. So these things. So, using hand sanitizer, let it dry too. Okay. So a lot of people make the mistake of putting hand sanitizer on, wiping, and then going. You've got to really make sure it dries. But then, make sure you're washing your hands, washing them really well, making sure that you are getting underneath those fingernails. And ladies, if you have long fingernails like I do, make sure that you're really scraping underneath those nails. I know this is kind of gross, but and I wash my hands all the time, but even still, you can kind of still get under your fingernails and kind of scrape some goop out of there. Get under there, okay? So if you are around sick people, if you are thinking that you're really concerned about this, wash your hands really, really well. You don't have to do a full surgical scrub, all the way up, but really, really wash your hands, okay?
Well, let's talk about why are we actually washing our hands? Because it spreads by touching the droplets and then touching your face, your mouth, or your nose, or your eyes. So that's why, you want to keep from touching your face, which is really, really hard to do. I wipe my nose and scratch my eye all day long. So the more I'm washing my hands, the less of a chance there is that I'm touching something and then putting it back onto my face, which I'm doing right now. We're talking about it.
Don't do it.
But we were.
That's why. It's not. We're not trying to dry out your hands. And I was telling them I used to have eczema, so washing hands is just not that fun, But it's better now.
Well, and the hard thing is for a lot of people is to not touch their face. So, there's a funny meme going around. Laura was telling us about, all of the health officials basically saying, hey, don't touch your face. And then immediately afterwards, they all either pick their nose, or they're touching their eyes, or they're touching their face in some way or the other. And so this is really challenging. Everybody touches their face. I think the average person picks their nose 8 times a day or something. So, and next time you pick your nose, you're going to be thinking about that. Is it really 8 times a day that I pick my nose? So, these are things you don't really think about, you're just kind of whoop, and you pick your nose. You do some sort of little thing, but you're not thinking about
scratching your nose, not
or you're scratching your nose.
Scratching that.
Yes.
Something is
Something
happening.
happens to come out.
So what you're saying is it's a really good time to break picking your nose, break the habit of picking your nose and chewing on your fingernails. Right. So, yeah.
Well, that's good for flu too, right? Because where does the flu virus live? In our noses.
Yeah.
So it's good for any. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. It's good all the time. So break those habits. Right.
Right. Break the habit.
Let's talk about some of the stuff that we recommend taking, or antiviral strategies.
Yes. All right. So number one is something for me is something called V-Clear. That's by Integrative Therapeutics. That's not, again, a direct endorsement, but yeah, love it. Also, you can get natural, oh my goodness, it's called Umka. So you can get it over the counter at a grocery store, that sort of thing. There you go. Good job, girls. I love it. So these are literally it's called Pyogonium pseudoides. It's an African herb. It's been studied to the ends of the earth. It's pretty much safe for anybody. But in terms of upper respiratory infections, so SARS-2, which is what COVID-19 is actually called now. Well, COVID-19 is actually the disease. The virus is the SARS-2, but the It's a lower respiratory infection. Upper respiratory infection, we're going to assume that it's still going to be active. But the V-Clear or the Oomca, this is basically one of the only things that we have that really is going to work as an antiviral. Okay, so in studies, they basically put two children next to each other. Both have influenza A, both it's going to cause a upper respiratory infection. One kid takes it, one kid doesn't. Kid that takes it doesn't really have febrile illness. Okay, so this kid basically is taking, V-Clear Oomca 3 times a day, has very mild symptoms, maybe a tiny little runny nose, a little bit of a sore throat, no fever, basically 2 or 3 days later walks away. Still has positive viral titers for influenza A, but would never even bat an eyelash, out playing with their friends, no big problem, okay? It doesn't mean you're not shedding viral particles, by the way, so we're talking about transmission of disease. Be careful there. You still want to stay down. You still want to not be spreading disease, especially when we're talking about, pathogenic type of diseases like SARS. But, when we're talking about actually feeling bad or risk of having pneumonia, which is what the real risk factor is for these types of diseases, you're really having protective value. Okay. So, we're getting tons and tons of calls into the office. This is what we're looking at, guys. Okay. So this is one of the top things that we can do. Easy, effective, over the counter, readily available, hasn't sold out yet. This is something not yet. You're welcome, Integrative Therapeutics. This is something like, I have stockpiles of this. One of my kids has been sick. My other daughter and I have been taking this product, and we are not sick. So this is something I travel with. This is something I have with me all the time. I don't generally get sick. At the very first sign of sniffle or anything like that, I take these products. So a couple of other things that have been really popular in terms of what you're seeing out on social media or what you're hearing coming out of other sources. So let's talk about a couple of those. We want to talk about things like ozone. We're going to talk about things like vitamin C. We're going to talk about vitamin A, and then we're going to talk about a couple of medications that you might be taking that might actually be protective. So let's start with vitamin C, since that's uber popular. So I'm going to throw that over to Michelle.
Yeah, so vitamin C can be antiviral. I'm echoing. Antiviral, but as we talked about a couple weeks ago, vitamin C, when you take it in high doses, actually turns into oxalate crystals. And for people who can degrade those crystals, it may be okay, but people who can't, who have a genetic variation for hyperoxaluria, may, if they take it for a long period of time, may have oxalate crystal buildup in their body, which can be very painful. We also have the problem where the vitamin C transporter can actually only transport or absorb up to 500 milligrams at a time. So when you're taking really high doses, is it doing anything, Chrissy?
No.
Or are we just taking it out? There's some people have very strong opinions about this, and they really think it's doing something, but biochemically, I don't think it is.
Well, remember that vitamin C, as Laura mentioned, is a laxative. So yes, it's doing something. But two, one of the things that people kind of forget about is that ascorbate is a cofactor. So ascorbate is actually the cofactor in the conversion of reduced glutathione to oxidized glutathione. So if you overdose on vitamin C, the net result is actually going to be more oxidized glutathione, which is the wrong form of glutathione. We want reduced glutathione in the body. So this means that we're going to have an oxidative net in the body, which is bad. So, people think, oh, vitamin C is good. But if you're taking, trying to do a prophylactic dose of vitamin C, and you don't feel good, not to mention having some diarrhea, because, where do I sign up for that? But, if you don't feel good, if you have muscle pain, joint aches, those kinds of things, one, you might have an oxalate issue, because most people have some kind of impairment in their oxalate genes. This is something that, we do a lot of here at NGI, but a lot of people don't study this type of thing. But if you have a strong family history of kidney stones, fibromyalgia, Alzheimer's disease, those types of things, those should be warning signs for you. But if you end up having, trouble with just not feeling great taking high dose vitamin C, then, I would certainly think about another alternative for viral prevention. It's probably not the best thing for you. And keep in mind that, again, the vitamin C transporter, only 500 milligrams at a time. That's usually about a 12-hour window too. So, your maximum is about 1,000 milligrams a day for what you can biologically absorb.
Right.
So that's
this goes for the what's it called when we put it in the droplets?
liposomal.
Liposomal and intravenous, like
Correct.
IV, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
People ask
okay.
me that. Oh, is it different? Is it different in different forms? And I'm like, no.
Mm-mm.
Nope.
Yeah. So super, super important there. Let's talk a little bit about ozone. So ozone is something that was studied with the original SARS outbreak. And so they actually found that ozone was an effective way of killing SARS. So SARS is another coronavirus, one that came out, around 2005. So, that was pretty scary. I think most of us here are old enough to have lived through the majority of the outbreaks in recent history. So, things like Ebola in the 70s, the influenza outbreaks, H1N1, SARS, those types of things. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of things that go along with these types of things. There are always a rush to create a cure for these types of things. So those are a couple of little things I want our listeners to consider and think about.
And a rush to say what the fatality rate is, which you can't actually do because we don't know. There are too many unknowns. So
that is a point I'd really like to drive home right now, is that as maybe people have noticed a little bit more, this is the one time that we've actually had a robust social media response or access. Because back in 2005, we had Facebook, but it wasn't, Facebook really wasn't all that much of a thing until like 2007. Right now, people have really been paying attention to that. But in terms of epidemiology, just to kind of give a little framework to that, at the beginning of any epidemic, the numbers are highly inflated. So they really, really focus on where the outbreak is, how many deaths there are, and they're over-reported, okay? Because they're only looking at the people that are sick and then the people that have died in that one little location. And they're not really testing the broader population, because there are a lot of people that have the infection, but it's mild and they don't really get sick, and they're certainly not dying, and they're not going to the hospital. So it often takes months, guys, months and months and months before the actual numbers come back, because they're trying to kind of predict, how many people actually got sick? Well, how many people actually died, until they get that real ratio of numbers. So oftentimes you'll see the mortality rate being really, really high to begin with. And then as the epidemic goes on, then the mortality rate drops, okay? So unless we're dealing with something like Marburg, which is like one of the most deadliest viruses on the planet, this is a hemorrhagic virus, kind of like Ebola. So unless we're dealing with something like Marburg, then, I'm not gonna really kind of flip out about this, all right? So the mortality rate estimation for this particular virus is now down to about 1%, okay? So this is much less than the flu. It's not, you're not really looking at a dangerous sort of circumstance here, but we still have a lot of people who are concerned about this virus. So going back to IV ozone, SARS, on the other hand, the first SARS, SARS-1, did have a mortality rate close to 5 or 6%, if memory serves. So much, much higher than this particular virus, than SARS-2. So it was pretty scary back then. You know, I had an infant at that point. I was talking about taping up the windows and not going anywhere. And, you know, it's pretty scary, especially for a new mom at that point, a young mother. So, you know, that is something, you know, the IV ozone, if you actually have a viral infection and you don't have autoimmune disease, IV ozone can upregulate autoimmune conditions, okay, as can some other herbals like elderberry and certain things like that that are really popular. So, but if you actually have an infection, if you actually are sick, then there is some evidence to show that things like ozone can actually kill coronaviruses. So food for thought on that. So far we're looking at low doses of vitamin C, Oomca or V-Clear, and if you actually already are sick, then using IV ozone. So because if you're using it as a prophylactic, it's not really going to work. It's just going to upregulate your immune system. It may kill some other things that you have in your body, but it's not going to specifically target the virus. Okay? All right. Let's talk about vitamin A. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Well, we were talking about some teenagers are actually protected because they're taking something called Accutane, which is basically retinol. And you remind me of what the mechanism was there.
Well, so I mean, vitamin A and vitamin D are friends. You know, they are, you know, working on immune activation. So many people talk about taking vitamin D all the time for immune system health. But the vitamin A receptor and the vitamin D receptor, they're besties, and they need each other to work properly. But high dose vitamin A actually helps with immune activation. And so it's pretty interesting to think that maybe teenagers who are taking things like Accutane may have some, I wouldn't call it innate protection, but they may have some protection from antiviral protection. There are some people that are suggesting to take high dose retinols as a protective measure for viruses. So, you know, these are things, you know, 10,000 IU of vitamin A, those types of things, sometimes higher. Again, this is something that if you have autoimmune disease, you should approach this with caution. Anything that is going to upregulate the immune system will also upregulate your autoimmune condition. So there are always pros and cons to these types of things. In the same breath, there are some evidence to suggest that drugs like Plaquenil, so things that people are taking if they have MS or if they have lupus or other conditions, you know, where you would take Plaquenil. This is an anti-malarial drug that we use for rheumatic conditions. You know, they are having some protection, some antiviral protection against coronavirus and other viruses as well. So, you know, there are some interesting things out there in terms of looking at either certain medications that people are taking or certain substances that you can take. But, you know, when it comes down to it in terms of protecting yourself from things like coronavirus or other viruses in general, here in Virginia, we're still having, you know, widespread influenza outbreak. So, you know, you couldn't tell whether or not you had the flu or whether or not you had coronavirus. You know, I think it's important to distinguish that coronavirus, you know, you're typically going to have a dry cough. You're not going to be having a lot of sneezing, that sort of thing. So the symptoms are a little bit different than when you have the regular flu. But, you know, in general, I think that, you know, we just need to take the general precautions that you would for any other any other viral condition, and to, make sure that you're washing your hands, washing your hands and trying not to touch your face as much. Ladies, you
one other important piece of this too, especially as we talk about how anxious everyone is the role of stress. Particularly, we were sort of talking about the study that, especially since we talk about genetics, but the ACE, gene and how it upregulates angiotensin and causes that that respiratory reaction as well. And I don't know if you can explain that probably better than I can, but how stress basically impacts the immune system and the respiratory system and the vascular system.
Sure. So, you mean the study that you sent me on the ACE deletion and, I'd have to remember. I'd have to go look at the study. I don't remember exactly what it said right now, but basically the study said
one of the things they were noticing that, and you'll see this in the data that they're releasing, is that people who have cardiovascular disease are more prone to fatality, and that's partly because of this upregulation, right, of angiotensin to angiotensin 2. So they were looking at basically how that impacts the respiratory system and makes it harder for them to recover. And I think they were talking about too, like the impact of smoking and those kinds of things as well, and how it impacts the ability to clear breathe basically, right, and not develop complications like pneumonia as well.
Right. So, I think, and you'll have to forgive me because I don't remember exactly. I remember reading that study. That was a couple of weeks ago. But if theoretically, if someone has the ACE deletion, then they would have an overconversion to angiotensin 2. So then they would have, so one of the enzymes are actually made in the lungs, and then the other enzyme is made in the liver, and then they have the conversion. But the stress factor, especially combining in cardiovascular disease there. So cardiovascular disease and metabolic disease in general is going to increase the risk for pneumonia and disease susceptibility. The ACE deletion is just going to impact that axis even more so. Which would be problematic, and could theoretically increase their risk factors of catching the disease by decreasing their immune function, which would be bad. So I think in terms of looking at overall immune function, making sure that you keep your body in balance and keep your stress levels. That's one of the best ways that we can, keep everything in line. I think that there's a lot of frustration from people when we tell them to eat well and, keep your body in balance and, keep your stress levels down, because I think that stresses out a lot of people. I think it's a little bit, they kind of go, well, if I wasn't stressed, then, then I have a perfect life. And, I think people, that's generally, yes, of course, those are things. I think things like love tuning is kind of a cool thing for people because it's a tangible thing. That's one of the reasons I like it so much. It's something they can actually physically do. Things like taking a supplement, it's something tangible. I think a lot of times when they're scared, they want something that's tangible. They can hold it, they can do it, they can act on it. Because I think in the fear-based insanity right now that's happening with the media and all of the hype that's happening here, I think the important thing to remember is, one, the mortality rate for this is really, really low, much lower than just influenza. Two, turn off your TVs, guys. That's really important. Stop and stop really paying attention to all that. And understand the mechanism of epidemiology and how this stuff actually works. Take some preventative measures. And because listening to the media is going to stress you out even more. But take some preventative measures. Make sure you're washing your hands. Make sure that you're, trying not to touch your face. And if you're around somebody sick, then, make sure that you start taking, something like V-Clear or Umka. And if your genetics are suited for it, take some vitamin C. If you don't have autoimmune disease, consider taking vitamin A. All of those things can be really, really helpful for you. And if you do get sick, then there are other things that you can consider as well, like potentially the IV ozone. So, there are things that you can do, when you're confronted with a virus. Viruses are pretty cool little creatures. They're not really animals. They're not, not really life forms. These phages are, they're pretty crafty little things. So, we don't really have anything that really attacks them, quite the same way that we do in terms of antibiotics or antifungals or anything like that. They're their own unique little creatures. And so they're uniquely designed to hijack our DNA. So, I mean, there can be scary little things, which is why they're so lethal, when they are, pretty deadly ones. But the point about this particular coronavirus, is that this one isn't so bad. So, take care of yourself. Make sure that you take some preventative measures, and I think everything will kind of settle down here pretty soon. So if you guys have any questions at all about coronavirus, please put your comments in the comment boxes for us. And you can send us an email at either Dr. Chrissy at ngiva.com or Sam, Laura, or Michelle, CNS at ngiva.com. And we hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. And we will see you guys next week on Gene Bites. Bye, guys.
Yes.